Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome you to a very special episode of my Did You Know series. In this one, I'll be talking over a theory that I have found extremely interesting, and I'm sure many of you will find interesting as well. There's been a lot of theories and speculation around the community, especially on Reddit, saying that Nocturne is potentially Zed in the future. And there's been a lot of really interesting things that have been said in the community to further back this up, and I want to try and go through as much of that as I can in this video with you guys, and then at the end of this video we can all decide, is it true or is it not? I will be referencing a lot of posts made by the community from Reddit, so if you want to see those posts for yourself, the description below under this video will contain links to those. But without further ado, let us jump into some of the facts behind this theory. There's a Reddit post with 3 different images which each overlap the splashwork for Shockblade Zed and of course the default Nocturne. Here's the most basic one where the 2 images are simply put side by side, and you can see in both the splashworks they look awfully similar. Zed and Nocturne are both facing the exact same way in almost the exact same position. Here are 2 more images of the actual overlapping of the 2 artworks. Again, the similarities are quite uncanny, and you can see that the Nocturne one seems to fit directly on top of Zed. However, this is just the beginning of the proposed relationship between Zed and Nocturne. There are also some very interesting points mentioned in the Reddit thread that somewhat link the lore between Zed and Nocturne. Taking a look at Zed's lore, you can see that at the bottom it states, when Zed followed his master into the temple to destroy the box, the only thing that the assembled ninjas outside heard was Zed cry out in pain. Which from that he ended up coming out unscathed with the master's head. There are many theories as to why Zed cried out in pain, but the 2 most believable ones are the first one stating that the master got Zed into a 1v1 scenario away from his own ninjas, and as they entered the temple the master tried to do some sort of technique that will remove the shadows from Zed, which is why he ended up crying out in pain, but obviously did not work and Zed ended up killing him instead. The second theory is maybe that Zed, when he entered the temple with his master, the shadows ended up overtaking Zed's mind and thought, and because of this Zed was not able to control his actions nor that of his shadows. Now whether Zed himself killed his master or potentially his shadows came out and killed his master is still something that is questionable, but this one seems a bit more believable and it fits a lot better into this scenario. Now as we take a quick look at Nocturne's lore, the interesting thing about this one is the part where it says physicians were baffled until a field architect happened to pass out next to a nexus on the twisted tree line. Witnesses said he cried out once and then stopped breathing, and immediately after, magical energy arced out from the nexus and Nocturne appeared. Now the question is, was it actually a field architect? Did they maybe just see something else or were not able to see exactly what they should have? But the main thing to link between these 2 lores is that both of them have someone crying out in pain. And after the crying is done, someone always emerges out. Another obvious relationship between the 2 is that both champions are very relatable to shadows and darkness. Another relationship between the 2 is that their roles are listed the exact same, primary for both being assassin and secondary for both being fighter. So speaking of both champions being extremely relatable to shadows and or darkness, there was another very interesting Reddit thread that compares the similarities on the abilities and the quotes between Nocturne and Zed. Let's go through each of the points made. The first point is talking about Nocturne's passive, Umbra Blades. It talks about the definition of this word, which is a dark area, especially the blackest part of a shadow from which all light is cut off. Now doesn't that sound very relatable to Zed? Another point compares the quotes from Zed and Nocturne. Let's listen to the quote from Zed.
Cut the last breath from them.
But next, let's take a listen at what Nocturne can also say.
Cut them from this world.
Obviously quite similar. There's another very interesting point to bring up about Zed as well. We all know how in Zed's lore he opens up a box that gives him the powers that he now has, the shadows. And especially from something like this, there's been a lot of assumptions that the shadows will slowly but surely take over Zed's mind and body. Which means now is the perfect time to bring up another very interesting quote that Zed has.
What I have done cannot be undone.
So this quote obviously does not only suggest that what he has done cannot be undone, but it also seems to suggest that what he has done will also slowly progress over time, up and potentially until the part where Nocturne emerges. There are a few more very interesting quotes that Zed says that I want to go over with you guys as well that are also extremely relatable to Nocturne.
Brave the shadows, find the truth.
And also,
do not fear the shrouded path.
This second quote is a bit more interesting because it can relate to one of 2 things. The first thing is Nocturne's Q, Dustbringer, because his Q is of course a path of darkness, or aka a shrouded path. The second thing it could potentially reference to is Nocturne's W, Shroud of Darkness. Obviously the main thing that Zed is probably referencing when he says do not fear the shrouded path is his history. since Zed obviously left the Kinku Order and went into his own dark path with his shadow arts and even made his own teachings. And of course, this dark path that he chose is slowly consuming him, and it's also known as the Shrouded Path. And here's the quote that kind of backs up his choice and decision for taking the path that he did.
The truth lies in darkness.
There are a few more quotes that are extremely relatable between Nocturne and Zed that I want to share with you guys as well. Let's take a listen to Nocturne's first.
Embrace the darkness.
Now keep in mind, this is Nocturne saying darkness after he's already supposedly transformed into the being that he is now from what Zed is currently. Yet prior to him of course transforming into such an evil and dark creature, Zed also has a very similar taunt.
Embrace the shadow or die in darkness.
One person's theory for this is that Zed headed down the unforgiving path to become the Nocturne was probably because he realized that there is actually no turning back from the Order of the Shadow after you have given into it. When resistance proved to be fatal, Zed had no choice but to
embrace the shadow.
There's also another very interesting point that I want to mention to you guys. But in order for it to make sense, there is something else that I must talk about first. There is speculation that based on the quotes that Nocturne and Eternum Nocturne say, they are potentially from the future that came back in time to taunt Zed, and that Eternum Nocturne is even a more corrupted version of Nocturne himself.
This place disgusts me. Demons of this plane are no threat.
We all know that Nocturne and Eternum Nocturne have many quotes that show them talking to the Summoner, such as,
Do I scare you, Summoner?
However, some of the quotes that they do say would make so much more sense if they are assumed to be directed to the current time's Zed. For instance, this quote said by Nocturne,
Help is not coming.
Or this quote from Eternum Nocturne,
Scanning. Failure is your destiny.
And finally, something else that is also extremely interesting to mention. During Zed's jokes or taunts, you see him doing something with his shadow, usually trying to beat it in some way. If he does not win, he ends up killing the shadow. Also, a neat thing is that in Zed's death animation, you never see him actually die, and instead, you see him narrowly escaping with a portal, probably due to the shadows forcing it to happen, or maybe protecting him in some way. So this overall suggests that potentially in the future, at one point, Zed loses control over these shadows and they finally overpower him, and thus Nocturne is born. Also, have you ever noticed the similarities between Zed's Shadow Slash ability and Nocturne's passive Umbra Blades? The animations of the two skills seem extremely similar. Let's take a look at those as well. In the animation of Zed's Shadow Slash ability slowed down, you can see he just kind of spins around with his blades. And now taking a look at the same thing from Nocturne's passive, it's almost the exact same thing. Coincidence? I think not. Now before I end off this video, there's also one more very interesting fact that I want to talk to you guys about, almost like a different take on this whole theory. Someone suggests that Nocturne is not born from Zed's shadows and the shadows overtaking Zed, but instead, Nocturne is born from the nightmare that Shen has of Zed. There's a lot of things that reference to Nocturne being born off people's nightmares, especially considering he also has a quote about it.
Are you my nightmare? Or am I yours?
So we all know how Zed did end up killing his master, who also happens to be Shen's father. And since Shen's whole purpose was to train to be a student and overtake his father's role and duty as the Eye of Twilight. Since Shen has always been a very strong student in his school, especially considering that his father is the Eye of Twilight, this also means that Shen has achieved a higher state of mind. Thus, this person, Daktush's theory, is that Shen's subconscious generated a nightmare of his father and master's killer, a nightmare which got amplified by the Eye of Twilight's abilities, making Nocturne appear out of nowhere as described in the lore, and making him similar to Zed. Nocturne is what remains of Shen's human side. This is a very interesting theory, especially when you consider some of the points that he put behind it. He mentions how the ultimates of Shen and Nocturne are extremely similar yet also quite opposite. Shen's ultimate has him teleporting to an ally to protect them, while Nocturne teleports to an enemy to damage them. He also mentions that Shen's purpose is to judge, maintain equilibrium, and protect the innocent, while Nocturne's purpose is to kill anyone in his path that is most vulnerable. He then goes on to say that Shen's and Nocturne's Q abilities, Vorpal Blade and Duckspringer respectively, are both damaging blade abilities. Both Shen's and Nocturne's W ability are shield-like abilities. Their E is a close-range CC, of course Shen being a taunt, Nocturne being a fear. And their passives are also extremely similar, since they both get reduced by 1 second by using a basic attack and both provide an on-hit effect. So based off of this, Nocturne could have just been born off of Shen's nightmare of Zed after Zed killed his father and Shen could not protect him. Alright guys, that was quite the episode with loaded information. I hope you have learned something new and maybe got a new and interesting look at League of Legends lore, especially with Zed, Nocturne, and even Shen. In the comments down below, tell me what you guys think. Do you think Nocturne was born off of Zed's shadows overtaking him? Or do you perhaps like the idea of Nocturne being born as Shen's nightmare of Zed better? Or do you just not believe any of this and believe that both of the champions are just completely separate from one another? But that is the end of this video, guys. Please tell me what you thought about this kind of video. I do like these kind of videos and I want to do more of them as well. And of course, if you did enjoy, please don't forget to throw in a like down below, and also maybe follow me on my social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, and even Anook. On top of that, a quick shout out to my friend Pokito, who also runs a YouTube channel, fairly new. Definitely check it out. He has some sweet League of Legends content. So if you want to have more dose of League of Legends on YouTube, that is a channel you probably want to check out. The description below will contain the links for everything I just mentioned. But once again, I hope you guys enjoyed this and I hope to see you next time. Peace.